In this section, we'll look how Nixon's realpolitik played out in regard to China and the Middle East. Certainly, Nixon's realpolitik played out not just in nuclear talks with the Soviet Union, but in a variety of other bilateral agreements between the two countries. In 1971, for example, the Americans and the Soviets in both Germanys, the communist and free Germany, finally settled the thorny issue of West Berlin. The agreement formalized the existence of West Berlin permanently as part of West Germany and allowed for unhindered access to the city through East Germany. The following year, 1972, the U.S. and the Soviets, together with over 80 other countries, signed a convention outlawing the production and stockpiling of bacteriological weapons using disease as spread. Nixon saw improved relations with China as a way to make the Soviet Union more pliable, especially in regard to Vietnam. At the time, the U.S. only recognized the Republic of China, which was on the island of Taiwan, as the legitimate government of all of China. It had no formal relations with the People's Republic of China, or the PRC, mainland communist China, or as it was commonly called, Red China. The signs of Nixon's efforts at reform were evident early in his administration when he referred to the PRC as the People's Republic of China, not simply Red China. In early 1970, Nixon tried to conclude an agreement with the PRC on mutually relaxing trade and travel between the two countries, talks that had begun in Warsaw in 1968. The talks fell apart, however, because while Nixon wanted to focus on the specifics of trade and travel, the Chinese insisted on delving into the broader issue of Taiwan, that's the Republic of China, and whether it should exist. Still, however, high-level talks continued, and Nixon began to ease unilaterally restrictions on Americans going to China and trading with China. Finally, in 1971, the exchange of table tennis players began a thaw of relations. This became known as ping-pong diplomacy. Perhaps you saw this parodied in the movie Forrest Gump. As the talks continued, the United States let it be known that they would no longer veto a United Nations recognition of the PRC. They would, however, still fight the expulsion of the Taiwanese. Now, as a result, the UN recognized the People's Republic of China in 1971, but much of the American chagrin, it also expelled the Taiwanese. Nixon kept his efforts up, however, and let it be known that he hoped to travel to the PRC one day, and this is going to help lead to secret talks between Kissinger and the Chinese on making that visit a possibility. After Kissinger promised concessions on the Taiwanese, the People's Republic of China agreed to a Nixon visit, and therefore, in February 1972, Nixon made an historic visit to the PRC, the first president to visit Communist China. As part of the visit, in what became known as the Shanghai Communique, the U.S. agreed to a so-called One China policy, whereby the U.S. acknowledged that one government should control all of China, and that included Taiwan, but they left the question of which government, the Republic of China or the People's Republic of China, was that one government. The Americans agreed to withdraw their military from Taiwan, but promised aid and that it would continue to honor all of its mutual defense pacts with the Republic of China and Taiwan. Nixon's diplomacy led to the final U.S. recognition of the People's Republic of China, that is, full diplomatic relations, in 1979, when the Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping and American President Jimmy Carter signed the official agreement. As part of the agreement, the Americans no longer officially recognized the Republic of China and Taiwan, but kept to its undefined One China policy, while maintaining support of the Taiwanese. In the Middle East, there was a bit of a quagmire when Nixon took office. The Six-Day War of 1967, which had been discussed in a previous video, had led Israel to occupy some territories, the Golan Heights near Syria, the West Bank, on the west bank of the Jordan River in Jordan, just west of Jordan, the Gaza Strip along the Mediterranean, and the former Egyptian area of the Sinai. And the fact that Israel occupied these territories really angered many of the neighboring Arab countries. The anti-Western sentiment that grew led to a new anti-Western government in Libya in 1969 when the Colonel Muammar Gaddafi took over. At the same time, you see the Arab countries of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan sort of maintaining sort of an undeclared war with Israel, periodic bombings and so forth. In 1970, Egyptian leader General Gamal Nasser died, and a new leader, Anwar el-Sadat, emerged. Sadat hoped to reshuffle the Middle East and promote stronger diplomatic efforts for a permanent solution to the Middle East problems. That include expelling the Soviets from Egypt, which of course would please the West, but also he attacked Israel in a more coordinated and extensive way, which pleased the Arab leaders. Finally, on October 6, 1973, Egypt and Syria launched the attack during a Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, and the war therefore became known as the Yom Kippur War. The Israelis had immediate success in their defense and soon advanced toward the Syrian capital of Damascus. With the Egyptian troops well into the Sinai by this point, the UN adopted a resolution on October 22nd calling for a ceasefire, negotiated in part by Kissinger. The Israelis, however, wanted to improve their negotiating position and started a new offensive in the Sinai to push the Egyptians out. And this new advance destroyed the Egyptian forces and led Sadat to invite both the Soviets and the Americans to police a ceasefire. When the U.S. objected and the Israelis continued to advance, American-Soviet tension grew even more. Eventually, Kissinger, working with all parties, arranged a UN ceasefire that called for a multinational peacekeeping force, but with neither the Soviet nor American participation. As mentioned in the video on Nixon's domestic policies, the Yom Kippur War and the American reaction to it, its support of Israel, led the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, to boycott oil sales to the United States. And this boycott started the infamous energy crisis of the 1970s. Again, that was discussed in the videos on Nixon's domestic policies. After the Yom Kippur War, Nixon recognized that American-Arab relations needed improvement. All those oil-rich Arab countries really hated the United States. And so, over his remaining years in office, Nixon worked towards that goal. In a series of visits to the area, Kissinger not only worked to improve the ceasefire between Israel and Egypt with an early warning system of any potential attack, but also eventually restored U.S. relations with Egypt and Syria. Nixon even visited the Middle East in June 1974. Perhaps the most critical aspect of all this diplomacy was laying the groundwork for better relations with Sadat, the Egyptian leader. In the coming years, it helped the U.S. mediate the dispute between Israel and Egypt, and ultimately that contributed to the famous Camp David Accords during the Carter administration. In any event, this concludes the section on Nixon's realpolitik and Nixon's foreign policy in China and the Middle East.